On Thursday, February 11th, Congressman Richard Neal stopped by the Gazette for a freewheeling hour-long discussion with editors. The two-decade veteran of the House of Representatives talked about topics ranging from the surprising victory of Scott Brown to the state Senate seat, to health care reform, Neal's views on corporate tax dodgers, and President Obama's performance in office so far. Here are a few excerpts.
Well, I think in every election there's a trend, and he was very successful in catching the trend. And I think that one of the things that they did very skillfully was they used the Christmas Day bomber example to their plus side, and I think they did a very good job of confusing people between TARP and stimulus. The two are very different issues, and you know, when I was at PBTA today, I painstakingly took the time to try to explain it to some of the younger reporters that TARP was undertaken in October of 2008 at the behest of President Bush. And if you read the extract in the Wall Street Journal on Saturday from Paulson's book, it's a pretty good flavor as to what really happened. But the public has, I think, not made the disconnect between TARP and stimulus. They're treating stimulus as bailout. And
they see it all as public money.
Well, they see it's public money, but with TARP, the big banks have paid back all the money with interest. You know, GM is going to pay their money back this summer. And there's a prospect here that the government might make a few bucks off of it. Now, that ought not to be the motive or mission or the intent. But at the same time, when you read Paulson's accounting of what had happened when the president, at the request of John McCain, summoned Barack Obama to the White House, and they engaged at the White House about the peril that faced America if we didn't do TARP. So I voted for TARP, and I think it was the right thing to do, and happen to believe that it was the responsible position to undertake. Stimulus, I voted for because stimulus was done to create demand. In the absence of demand, we forget that people change their patterns all at once. And stimulus, you know, was to substitute for the lack of demand in the private sector and to address many long-standing public initiatives. And you know, we had a great announcement here a couple of weeks ago, the Department of Transportation. Ray LaHood's a good pal of mine. You know, repairing that rail from New Haven to Springfield to St. Albans is just a good piece of news. 60% to 70% of the American people are okay with the health care plan that they have. Many of those people now have never had to use it. That's when you find out what's in or out. And that causes some consternation. However, the president, I think, wisely said, if you like what you have, keep it. He wasn't attempting the Clinton plan. He certainly wasn't attempting the Truman plan. He was simply saying, if you like what you have, keep it. And we will build upon what we have incrementally. And then all of a sudden, the argument became death panels. Then the argument became a massive government takeover, despite the fact that the insurance industry helped negotiate with the president.
Right.
So, I mean, we're all...
Big pharmacy, too.
Yeah. And, you know, look, price has to be a determinant here. I mean, price, I don't think anybody can argue that universal coverage means that you're going to have all the care that you don't ever have to pay for. I don't think anybody was intending that. So price has to be part of it. But at the same time, it strikes me that until you get everybody in, based upon the Massachusetts plan, I don't know how you get to the goal line. There's a great quote in today's Wall Street Journal. The speaker, she said, there's snow on the ground, there's room for collaboration, there's room for cooperation, but the Senate is meeting. I thought that kind of summed it up. Look, there is no provision in the Federalist Papers for the filibuster. There is no provision in our Constitution for the filibuster. It is a legislative courtesy that both sides have extended to each other, along with the hold, for a long, long period of time. And if you were in East Brookfield, as I was earlier this week, at an elementary school and then at Prouty High School, in Spencer, when you explain that in those civics classes it was supposed to be 50 plus 1 constituting a majority, but in the United States Senate it's 60. It's hard to get anything big done. And you're seeing that kind of impasse now. I think it's a B. Yeah, considering
That's what he gave himself, right?
Yeah, considering what he inherited. Yeah, I'd give him a B. I think that he's learning some hard lessons. But I think some of the nature of the opposition to him, too, has been totally unfair. The idea that he's a socialist, the idea that he's not a citizen of the United States, the idea that he had embraced death panels in this legislation. I mean, come on, what about the conversation in America? We talk about civility, and so I think I think it's very unfair to him. And at the same time, I think that he's probably figured out that getting into the weeds and slugging it out is not such a bad position any longer. Yeah, I mean, if you take Clinton's presidency, first 2 years are pretty tough. Next 6 years, pretty good. Many of the problems that we have now, you can ascribe to the Bush administration. Iraq being the most notable example. And regardless of whether you were for Iraq or against Iraq, the bill has come due. And it's $1 trillion up front for the cost. Remember that those were supplemental budgets that were put together for the purpose of masquerading the cost of Iraq. That's the first $1 trillion. You have 31,000 young men and women who have served us honorably, who've been wounded. They're going to need these VA hospitals for decades to come. That's another $1 trillion. And to cut $2.3 trillion in taxes at the same time that you're invading Iraq and expanding the war in Afghanistan has had a huge impact on our budgetary realities. And recall that on January 19th of 2001, America was staring at a $5.6 trillion surplus projected over 10 years. Now granted, you can't project out over 10 years. You certainly don't try that here at the Gazette. But there was no getting away from the fact the budget had been balanced for 3 successive years, and we were projecting substantial surpluses for years to come. We had even not only eliminated the operating deficits, which recall that's year to year, but we had begun to pay down the national debt. And President Bush, looking at this enormous amount of revenue, decided that tax cuts were to be the item of the day, and I opposed it. And I just don't know how, for the first time in our history, that you could invade Iraq and subsequently cut taxes by $2.3 trillion. And that number, by the way, the 2.3, that comes from the Joint Tax Committee. So that's not a number that is made up or easily massaged.